What's going on, melon farmers? D-Mac here with a little experiment video that I wanted to make. So what I did was I created two identical franchise modes, both with the Ottawa Senators. One of them has 5 out of 10 attribute effects. That's the one we're looking at right now. The other one is 10 out of 10 attribute effects. We're going to simulate to the end of the season with both very quickly. Injuries are off, trades are off. We're simply looking at stats here. And we are going to see what the difference is between the 5 out of 10 attribute effects and the 10 out of 10 attribute effects. The way I am going to measure the differences between them is at the end of the season, I'm going to write down the top 8 point producers in the league, add up all of their point totals, divide by the number 8, and get an average point total of the top 8 players in the league. I'm also going to do that with the top 8 goaltenders. We're going to find out the average points of the top 8 players and top 8 goalies. Then we're going to find the average overall of those players. And then we're going to find an average in the top 5 teams in the NHL in goals for and goals against. Then we're going to hop on to the 10 out of 10 attribute effect franchise mode. And we're going to do the exact same thing. And at the end of the video, we are going to look at how much different they truly were. If this sounds like something that's going to be interesting to you, absolutely smash that like button, hit subscribe with the bell icon. There's going to be new videos like this and clips and Be A Pros and franchise mode episodes coming every frickin' day. Now let's just jump into it, and I will see you guys at the end of the season. Alright, so now that the regular season is done, the simulation is complete, the Ottawa Senators finished the year with a record of 43, 33, and 6. Good enough to get them the second wild card spot in the playoffs. Now let's look at the point leaders in the National Hockey League. We start with Nathan MacKinnon with 42 goals, 66 assists, and 108 points. Followed by Tyler Seguin with 44 goals, 57 assists, and 101 points. So only 2 people finished the year with 100 or more points. After that, we got Mikko Rantanen with 33 goals, 65 assists, and 98 points. Mitch Marner with 27, 68, and 95 points. Matthews with 55, 38, and 93 points. Patrick Kane with 37, 55, and 92 points. And switch those numbers around with Jack Eichel with 35, 57, and 92 points. And finally, Artemi Panarin with 27 goals, 60 assists, and 87 points to round out the top 8 in the NHL. For a grand total of 766 points between those 8 players, for a league average of 95.7 in the top 8. Now, we went and looked at everybody's overalls. MacKinnon is 92, Seguin's 89, Rant is 90, Marner's 90, Matthews is 90, Kane, Eichel, and Panarin are all 91. The average overall in the top 8 was 90.5 overall. Now jumping over to the winningest goaltenders in the NHL, we start with Grubauer with a 2.63 goals against average, Vasilevsky with a 2.36, Dubnyk with a 2.25, Shesterkin with a 2.84, Carter Hart with a 2.75, Lundqvist with a 2.67, Markstrom with a 2.40, and Ben Bishop with a 2.87. The total is 20.77 goals against per game when all 8 are playing. The average is 2.59 goals against. The average overall of these goaltenders is 87.25. Now we move over to the team stats aspect of everything, where we look at who had the most goals for per game and who had the fewest goals against per game. We'll start with goals for. Colorado at 3.68 leads the way, followed by Winnipeg at 3.32, Tampa Bay at 3.18, Pittsburgh at 3.18, and Arizona at 3.18 goals for per game. Then this one actually surprised me quite a freaking bit. The fewest goals against per game in the National Hockey League goes to San Jose with 2.30. Tampa Bay follows them with 2.57, Calgary with 2.66, Nashville with 2.68, and Colorado with 2.71. Now that is all the stats I am going to give you for the 5 out of 10 attribute effect franchise mode. So let's just jump on over to the 10 out of 10 one, and let's see if the stats come up at all for the top 8 point getters. if the goals against average goes either down or up for the top 8 goaltenders, what the overalls difference is for everybody, goals for per game, goals against, and let's see if at 10 out of 10 attribute effects, a team like Ottawa can still make the playoffs like they did in the 5 out of 10 one that we just did. And at the end of the season, with our 10 out of 10 attribute effects franchise mode, the Ottawa Senators finished off with a much more realistic 32, 43, and 7 record, leaving them last in the Atlantic Division. And if you will remember, when we did the 5 out of 10 attribute effects, Gino Dadonov did finish first on the Ottawa Senators, but he had 80 points. In this one, much more realistically, he has got 58 to lead the team. Now, when it comes to the point leaders in the NHL, both times Nathan MacKinnon did lead the parade with 108 points. But unlike the last one, we had 3 people instead of 2 finishing the season with 100 plus points. We got MacKinnon with 108, Eichel with 102, Scheifele with 100, Crosby with 97, Larkin with 96, Hall with 92, Wheeler with 91, and Elias Pettersson with 88. For a grand total of 774 points over the 8 players, up from 766 in the 5 out of 10 attribute effects video, for an average of 96.75 points in the top 8 compared to 95.7. So, the points totals at the end of the season in the 10 out of 10 attribute effects went up by just over 1 point on average. But this is where things got a little different. The average overall of the players in the 5 out of 10 was 90.5. The average overall for these top 8 players is actually down to 89.75. Because with 10 out of 10 attribute effects, the game is more team realistic. The right teams get more goals, and the wrong teams get less points, like the Ottawa Senators. In the 5 out of 10 attribute effects, Ottawa made the playoffs. In this 10 out of 10 one, they came last in their division because they're the worst team. Dadonov had 80 points in the first one. He only has 58 in this one. The team play is much more realistic, so the dominant teams have the better point totals. That's why the average overall may be down a little bit, because it's not just one player dominating because his overall is really high. It is really dominant teams dominating. Anyway, here's one that was actually a bit of an outlier for me. First of all, it's unrealistic that 39-year-old Henrik Lundqvist for the Capitals is going to play 72 games next season. Absolutely not, especially with Ilya Samsonov. But Henrik Lundqvist finishes the season with a 3.00 goals against average, but he is still the winningest goalie. Number 2 is Ben Bishop with a 267, Freddie Anderson in third with a 236, Hellebuck with a 299, Hart with a 275, Shesterkin with a 272, Gibson with a 246, and Vasilevsky in 8th with 246 as well, for a grand total of 21.41 goals against per game average if all 8 goalies are playing, up from 20.77. So the average goals against average is 2.67, up from 2.59. So goaltenders got a little worse because scoring went up a little more. The average overall of the goaltenders, however, last time was 87.25. This time it's 88.25. I know Lundqvist is the outlier, and he's only 84 overall, and he really throws that whole statistic off. If you would just remove Lundqvist and go with the rest of the list down the way, that average overall goes up quite significantly. Now, when we get into the actual team stats, when we go to the entire league, Washington is the number 1 goals for per game team, actually tied with the Buffalo Sabres in second place with 3.43. Now, in the 5 out of 10 attribute effects, Colorado was the number 1 team with a 3.68. But in this one, 3.43 is the league total. So scoring in the NHL technically goes up, but the best team's goals for per game goes down slightly because it's much more spread out over the dominant teams in the league. So third place is Toronto with 3.37, whereas in the last one, Tampa had a 3.18 at number 3. Colorado has a 3.32, and in 5th, Pittsburgh with a 3.28, whereas in the other one, it was a 3-way tie, 3rd, 4th, and 5th with 3.18 goals for per game. Now when we go to goals against per game, the leader is actually Tampa Bay with a 2.49, which is much more realistic than San Jose with a 2.3. So 2.49 with Tampa leads the parade in fewest goals against. Anaheim behind them with a 2.57. Toronto with a 2.6. Boston with a 2.68. And Buffalo Sabres on both goals for and goals against lists have a 2.71. And they also clinched a playoff spot, second in the NHL as a team with 109 points behind the Tampa Bay Lightning with 110. So overall, there were a couple of outliers that did stand out to me. Some of the stats went the way I thought they would. Some of them went not the way I thought they would. I think overall, what we can take away from this is, as far as individual players go, I think the 5 out of 10 attribute effects doesn't really make that much of a difference when it comes to players. Their overalls, your overall doesn't really matter quite as much in the 5 out of 10 attribute effects. But for some reason, the points total stayed very similar. And, if I'm going to be 100% honest, looking at the 5 out of 10 points, the names that are on that list, MacKinnon, Seguin, Ranta, Marner, Matthews, Kane, Eichel, Panarin, with the exception of maybe Seguin, I would say that's a pretty realistic top 8 in the NHL. Other than McDavid and Draisaitl, obviously, who were nowhere to be found on either one of these lists. But I like that a whole lot more than I like McKinnon, Eichel, Scheifele, Crosby, Larkin, Hall, Wheeler, and Pettersson. So when it comes to the players, I wouldn't put too much stock in player stats on 10 out of 10 attribute effects. But what I noticed the most was team stats. The team stats on 10 out of 10 were much more realistic, meaning your better teams are going to be more dominant and your worse teams are going to play worse. So the Ottawa Senators in the 5 out of 10 did very, very well beyond expectations, even though they're not a very good team, whereas they did very poorly in the 10 out of 10 simulation and had a much more realistic result, and Tampa Bay finishes first place. So it's kind of a toss-up. I think for players, 5 out of 10 is fine. For teams, 5 out of 10 is very unrealistic, and 10 out of 10 is definitely the way to go. Anyway, that's all I got to say about this one. I hope you guys enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe with the bell icon. There's going to be new stuff coming all the time. And until next time, you beautiful melon farmers, have a good one.